After weeks of will they or won't they, North Korea and the U.S. have finally agreed to resume denuclearization talks. North Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Choe Son-hui announced just a few hours ago that Pyeongyang-Washington working-level talks will take place on October 5th, following pre-arrangements that will be made the day before. The announcement comes amid new factors that have emerged that could affect future negotiation strategies of the two sides. An impeachment inquiry has been formally launched into U.S. President Trump's conduct, while North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is highly likely to visit China soon to mark 70 years of Pyongyang-Beijing diplomatic ties. Today we go in-depth on prospects of North Korea-U.S. denuclearization talks with Dr. Bong Young-shik, a researcher at Yonsei University Institute for North Korean Studies. It's always good to have you with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So North Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Choe Son-hui has just announced that North Korea and Washington have agreed to resume their working-level talks. Did you see this coming?
Yes, I can say that it was coming because there was a confirmations, and not just one, but multiple confirmations made by North Korean side. The first one was, of course, the statement issued by Vice Foreign Minister Choe Son-hui herself that there will be the working-level meeting to be resumed very soon, and it was corroborated by the bureau chief of the North Korea's foreign ministry, and the remark by the North Korean ambassador to the United Nations in the aftermath of the United Nations General Assembly meeting also confirmed that the date was set for both parties to resume talks. So there are a lot of indications that North Korea was really ready, finally, to resume the working-level negotiations with the United States.
So there were indications
Yes.
and several signs that the two will likely resume talks soon. Now, there have been a tug of war between Pyongyang and Washington for quite some time, though, with the North saying that the U.S. must come up with a new method in order for the talks to resume, while the U.S. has continued to stress that sanctions will remain in place. What do you think was the biggest factor that led North Korea and the U.S. to agree on a date to resume talks?
Well, there are several factors that North Korea finally agreed to resume the working-level negotiations. One, I kind of promised to the Trump administration as the content of the personal letters of the Chairman Kim Jong-un to U.S. President Donald Trump explained that the excuse for North Korea not resuming the working-level meeting was the joint military exercises by South Korean military and the U.S. forces in South Korea during the summer. And at the same time, Chairman Kim Jong-un herself set the deadline for making a breakthrough on the front of the U.S.-North Korea negotiations in a speech delivered in the Supreme People's Assembly held in April, that we are going to wait until the end of this year. But until the end of this year, 2019 was fast approaching, so North Koreans cannot afford to wait forever. And North Korea also wanted to take advantage of new opportunities. One is the resignation of former National Security Advisor John Bolton, who has been the most hawkish voice inside the Trump administration. Now he's replaced by new National Security Advisor Mr. O'Brien. And President Trump also suggested the United States might consider a new way to deal with North Korea. So North Koreans must have seen this as a good opportunity that had to be seized by themselves.
And speaking of Trump's new security advisor, Robert O'Brien, do you think he is likely to have played a critical role?
I don't think so. I don't think so. If you consider the sheer physical amount of time that he has replaced Mr. John Bolton as a national security advisor, I don't think he was able to exercise any substantial influence upon any matters related to U.S.-North Korea negotiations. And I heard that he's a very quick study and very capable of catching up with all necessary and critical information and policy insights to substitute for his predecessors, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he has already set himself as the new voice inside the Trump administration. As President Trump himself reiterated so many times that he's the one who makes the critical decisions. Barring former U.S. President George W. Bush's own word, he's the decider, not National Security Advisor.
Who do you think will likely lead the delegations of Pyongyang and Washington from each side?
It is clear on the side of the United States, it will be Mr. Stephen Biegun, because he has been designated very specifically by President Donald Trump himself to lead the delegation for the United States, despite the fact that his official title and authority might be changed very soon. It is less clear on the side of North Korea because if you consider the same ranks and authority, then the expected counterpart for Mr. Stephen Biegun must be Madam Choe, the first Vice Minister of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of North Korea. But Choe seems to be in the background, calling shots in a very broad strokes. And the main appointment for North Korea's delegation is likely to be former ambassador to Vietnam and the main figure in the former six-party talks, Ambassador Kim Jong-un. So it seems like North Korea is maintaining a kind of a conscious strategy to maintain kind of a position of strength or one-upmanship to take upper hand in upcoming Working Level negotiations, at least in the initial stage of the Working Level negotiations vis-a-vis the United States.
Now, a number of thorny issues remain between Pyongyang and Washington that need to be ironed out. For instance, the definition of denuclearization and sanctions relief, just to name a few. What are the key points of this week's talks?
Well, Dawn, you just gave me the correct answers. It'll be, for the United States, definition of denuclearization and roadmap or timetable. North Korea refused to give any specific roadmap or timetable or a list of the programs and materials that it has produced and maintained. So definition of denuclearization will be the key issue for the United States. For North Korea, as you mentioned, it's an elimination and end of all hostile policy to North Korea, including relief of economic sanctions on North Korea. So it'll be the tug of war between the two sides on these two critical components. North Koreans will insist that we have to go back to the basic principles agreed between the two leaders in Singapore, which is the first two agreements, principles of the four principles agreed by Chairman Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump were ending the hostile relations between Pyongyang and Washington since the Korean War and building lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. And North Koreans will emphasize these two first principle agreed in Singapore, saying that in order to fulfill the Singapore agreement, you have to stop hostile policies first, including ending the economic sanctions on North Korea. On the other hand, the United States will also go back to the Singapore summit meeting and the agreement, but the third one, which is building denuclearization regime on the Korean Peninsula. So definition of what constitutes denuclearization will be the key component of the negotiations for the United States team.
And what kind of strategies do you expect from North Korea and the U.S. while addressing those two key points? What kind of cards do you expect the two sides to play?
The cards for Washington is that they are not in a hurry, according to the words repeated by President Trump himself. President Trump did not mince any word about sanction relief in his ninth summit meeting with the South Korean President Moon Jae-in in the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly meeting, meaning that it is belief held by the Trump administration that time favors Washington. As long as sanctions are in place, the time favors Washington. And North Korea has not conducted any new intercontinental ballistic missile tests or underground nuclear tests. So the tipping point has not been met by North Korea in terms of being able to pose a direct and grave threat with nuclear weapons to the United States. So the United States must be thinking that we can enter into these working level negotiations with a position of strength because time favors us. On the other hand, North Koreans wants to take advantage of the political vulnerability of the Trump administration, including the impeachment scandal. And they seem to believe that President Trump, who's the main decision maker for the U.S. government, must be under political pressures to generate some tangible outcomes with regard to eradicating, at least reducing, the nuclear threats of North Korea, because there will be presidential election in upcoming November.
And as you've briefly mentioned, Trump has recently mentioned about a new method. Do you think Trump's new method will likely be unveiled during Saturday's talks?
No, because there was new method. I guess President Trump simply recited the word repeated by North Korean side, new method, as an inducement for North Korean team to agree upon the actual resumption of working level meetings, which will actually take place on the 5th of October. But judging from the content of his answers to the reporter's question at the beginning of the summit meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, there was nothing new. There was new method. He might think that he has a new method, but whatever new method he might have in his mind, that has not been disclosed at all, which must be very disappointing to a North Korean team.
So nothing dramatically new is expected.
But we are talking about President Donald Trump, so hold your breath, and there might be some surprise coming on the way.
Now, meanwhile, impeachment inquiry has been launched into U.S. President Trump's conduct. What kind of impact would this have on future Pyeongyang-Washington denuclearization negotiations?
Almost none. That's because President Trump is a very unique character in terms of being able to separate different issues almost completely. So I don't think he is affected by his concern for the impeachment pressure coming from his political opponents at home. Impeachment is impeachment, and dealing with North Korea's WMD threat is another matter related to national security. So I guess he will be able to keep those two issues, domestic political situations and the North Korea's WMD programs, separately. But there's a tendency in Seoul and Pyongyang to think the opposite, that it seems like North Korean leadership and the South Korean government believe that President Trump must be under tremendous pressure, and he must have a very strong desire to score big and early in dealing with North Korea's nuclear missile threats as a way of divert domestic political pressure and criticism to his leadership and help overcome the challenges to his leadership. But I don't think that is correct. I think that's an erroneous assumption, because even if he will score big on North Korea's nuclear missile threats, timing is critically important, because we are still more than 1 year away from the U.S. presidential election, which will be next November. So any achievement with regard to North Korea or any foreign policy of foreign affairs will be forgotten, will not be a major factor in determining the constituents' decision to elect the new president of the United States by the time of presidential election, which is fall of 2020. So I don't think President Trump is in any hurry or under pressure to score big and score early with regard to North Korea. If he just agree on some sloppy deal with North Korea, then he must know, I believe, very well that it will make him even more vulnerable to political attacks from the other side.
All right, that is all the time we have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your perspectives.
You're welcome.